Welcome, everyone. Um, Welcome to this panel discussion on local strategies for advancing inclusive housing policies. My name is Karen Camacho, and I'm the Partnership for the VACE Future Challenge Grant Fellow in East Palo Alto, and I will be moderating today's panel discussion. This session is only 30 minutes long, which means we'll not have time to answer questions in the end. However, please feel free to add your questions in the Q&A box, and a PBF team member will get back to you in a follow-up email. Before I introduce our panelists for today, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land we're currently on. Those of us on the San Francisco Peninsula are on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land. And as the original stewards of this land, and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this land. And as guests, we must educate ourselves on the land we're on, how we're benefiting from living and working on their traditional homelands. And the process of colonization is still ongoing. It's still adversely affecting Indigenous peoples in the Bay Area and throughout the world. And we must learn how to be good allies, whether that's advocating alongside Indigenous peoples for their sovereignty or being good stewards of this land. So I'm very excited to be joined today by two outstanding panelists. Ofelia Bello is the Executive Director of Youth United for Community Action, also known as YUCA, and the Board Chair of Pahali CLT, a local community land trust in East Palo Alto. And Jennifer Pierce is the Housing and Community Development Manager for Alameda County. Our panelists today will share their experiences in developing cohesive local policies that protect families and individuals burdened by high rents, and that preserve and produce affordable housing. They'll also be discussing how to center marginalized voices for effective, inclusive policymaking that enables Bay Area residents to remain in their communities. An integral piece of policy change is partnership and collaboration, which was mentioned early in the earlier panels. And our panelists will also discuss how community groups and local governments can partner to bring the voices of renters, low-income residents, people of color, and young people into the process of adopting and implementing inclusive housing policies. So I'm very excited. And we'll start off with Jennifer and Ofelia, each of you introducing yourselves. Can you please tell us what you do and provide a quick overview of your role and work? What are some of the inclusive housing policies you've been working on that have centered marginalized voices? And we'll start with Ofelia and then go to Jennifer.
Sure. Thank you, Karen. And good morning, everybody. It's really great to be here among great company. And I was holding my breath a little bit to see my slide deck queued up. But nonetheless, I'll go ahead. There it is. I'll go ahead and dive right in now. Thank you so much. So my name is Ofelia Bello, and I am the executive director at YUCA out of East Palo Alto. And one of the other hats that I wear is also being the board chair of Pahali Community Land Trust. Next slide, please. I'm gonna focus a little bit on our work at YUCA, even though I really could have focused on either one. But the work that we're doing at YUCA right now, I think speaks to the role that we're playing in the challenge grant work. So YUCA, if you're not familiar, is a grassroots community organization created, led, and run by young people of color, the majority of whom are from low income communities. About 96%, 96 to 98% of our young people are from low income families. We provide a safe space for young people to empower ourselves and work on environmental and social justice issues to establish positive systemic change through grassroots organizing. Next slide, please. And on the next slide, it's just a quick picture of some of our youth organizers at different events. You can go ahead and go on to the next slide, please. This slide gives a little bit of background and some of touches on the goals of our overall housing work out of UCA. The challenge grant work is really a part of a broader campaign that we have at UCA, which we decided to name Keep EPA Housed. The goals of our campaign are both reactive and proactive, in the sense that the first goal is to stop the displacement of East Palo Alto's legacy residents and really support the leadership of tenants as they organize to create a stronger, unified tenant movement in East Palo Alto. So even within that, that part is more proactive, more forward thinking. And this is not just about getting education and doing outreach. This is about strengthening the tenant movement in East Palo Alto that has its own really powerful history and, you know, is now facing unprecedented struggles. The other part, the other goal, really quickly, is just to help establish long-term solutions to the housing instability, enter stage Pahali CLT, and what that means for our community in the long run. We want to preserve not only housing, but the people, the culture, the history, and the legacy, really the social fabric of East Palo Alto. This is not just about a housing unit. This is really about the social fabric of our community and those connections that make healthy, thriving communities be stable. And that's just as important in this work. So with that, I think I just wanted to go and click through. You can keep advancing through kind of every second or so. Some images of the specific images of outreach and education being done for Measure V, directly connected to our challenge grant work, and in 2018 around Measure HH. And you can go ahead and just keep clicking through a lot of actions and panels and advocacy and rallies around both keeping East Palo Alto housed, San Mateo County renters housed, and other related campaigns that we've embarked on in recent years, over the last 3 or 4 years. So those are just a few examples. And yes, of course, there's always the advocacy that happens at the city council level, both in East Palo Alto, and I think there's a picture in there of Menlo Park. So that touches a little bit on the advocacy that's necessary at the jurisdictional level. And I think there are only a couple more pictures in there, but that is my very quick intro.
Great. Thank you so much, Ophelia. Really exciting to see all the work that Yuka has been doing, and also excited to hear from Jennifer from the County of Alameda and her perspective.
Thanks, Karen. It's great to be here. So my name is Jennifer Pierce, and I am the Housing Community Development Manager overseeing the policy and program team with the county. Those two groups are in the same subgroup in our department because, as everyone here probably is aware, policies influence and direct programs. So they're really inextricably linked. We oversee, so we have two hats in our department in this team and overall, and I want to sort of explain that before jumping into a couple of examples. We are the housing department for the unincorporated county. This is similar to, a city housing department in that we can influence land use and help to drive ordinances and policies that really influence what is done on the ground in the unincorporated county, which includes Ashland, Cherryland, Hayward Acres, Fairview, Castro Valley, and Sunol. So, and in a broader sense, we are the housing department for the entire county in terms of broad policies that impact funding and other aspects of people's lives throughout the entire county. We can't infringe on land use broadly in the county, but we can certainly impact the lives of residents through policies. So with those two scopes, there's a couple of things that we've done recently that I wanted to touch on that I think are inclusive and fairly innovative. And it really stems, we've all heard about sort of the 3 Ps, but I like to think of programs and policies with a different lens in terms of building housing, keeping housing, finding housing, and keeping housing. And so each one of these programs that I'll touch on briefly really hits one of those points. So in terms of building housing, what we discovered recently with the passage of Measure A1 is that faith-based groups came to us and they said, hey, we've got a bunch of land that we would really like to utilize in order to build housing and help our communities stay in place and really impact the flow of displacement. And we said, well, that's great. We would love for you to do that. And we would encourage you to partner with an affordable housing developer because affordable housing can get really complex, as everybody knows. And the faith-based groups said, we would really like to do that, but we actually don't quite know where to start with that. And we don't even have the tools to be equal partners. And it was really an aha moment for us at the county. And so we took some boomerang money, which is some of our local money that's a little more flexible in its use than our Measure A1. And we partnered with LISC and the San Francisco Foundation and established the capacity building program for community-based and faith-based organizations. We just finished our first cohort of 10 community-based and faith-based organizations that we walked through and built their capacity to partner with developers and develop housing on their properties. And so, that was sort of an innovative approach that has been very successful. And we're about to launch our second cohort of 8 groups. And we provide pre-development funding, we provide technical assistance to faith-based and community-based organizations who apply throughout the county. So that's one way that we have felt that we have been able to put into place policies that provide really innovative programming. In terms of the ways to do innovative policies for finding housing, we are in the middle of developing with boomerang money a one-stop shop housing portal with a team at Exigy. And this will really democratize the finding of housing, which, as many of us on here know, currently involves people who need housing going to developers and property managers and really a catch-as-catch-can process in which frequently they discover that the wait lists are hundreds of people long, and then they start back at the beginning. So we're developing a one-stop shop housing portal whereby people will be able to find and apply for housing and be notified of when housing in their areas become available to apply to. Not only will this help marginalized populations access housing in a way they weren't able to access before, but it will actually drive future housing decisions, which we find really exciting, because through disaggregated data, we may discover that, seniors really want to live in Hayward Acres, and we're not building senior housing in Hayward Acres right now because nobody's proposed it, but we can really put policies into place so that these people in these communities can live precisely where they want. And so we really feel like this is an exciting way to engage these marginalized communities in all sorts of ways. And then finally, and I'll touch on this more later, the concept of keeping housing. We have an anti-displacement program through AC Housing Secure, which came about as through a robust community process in 2017. And this is run by Centro Legal de la Raza. And they have a cohort of legal aid agencies, and it provides legal assistance, housing counseling, as well as emergency financial assistance for households at immediate risk of eviction or foreclosure. And what we found is the ability to, and this really came out of this community process, people needed the help to get engaged before they lost their housing. And, it's such an effective strategy and has been effective since we got into contract with Centro in 2018 in terms of giving people the resources to be able to stay in their homes. So, these are just a few of the things that we do in my little team and that we think are really exciting.
Thank you so much. Some of the common themes that I see here is one, addressing what are the barriers to access that people may be facing. Two, trying to identify what are the different populations that may be impacted, who is being left out, and also thinking about the history of who has historically been left out. Can you speak a little bit more to the process of developing these policies, which can have a big impact on what the outcome is and who benefits? How do you help ensure an effective and inclusive community engagement process?
Would you like me to start?
Sure, you can go ahead.
So I'll give you an example of one thing that I think we did well, and a process in which maybe we didn't do as well. So for the anti-displacement strategy, which started in 2017, informed our AC Housing Secure, and then subsequently our challenge grant work in which we're currently engaged, we started to think about this concept of displacement. And what occurred to us was that we understood that communities were becoming displaced. We understood that people were moving. We didn't quite understand all of the whys, because a lot of times when communities and people become displaced, they leave. And so it's hard to engage with they've left, but the whys might be a little more subtle than you think. And we realized that the people who were most likely to be able to help us understand what should be done were the people, obviously, who lived in these communities. So what we did was we engaged on a series of community charrettes. We went out into the communities where people were living, into communities that were at risk of displacement, or communities that had already undergone significant displacement. And we had strategy sessions where, and I know a lot of you have done this, we gave people stickers and asked them to put stickers on various solutions and to write in additional solutions and to have broad discussions. And we did a lot of listening. And we heard some things, that we hadn't considered, and we got some feedback that we were expecting. And what came out of that broad county effort was the AC Housing Secure. And the reason AC Housing Secure was the first program and policy to come out of it was really the only one that could be, impacted through HCD on a county-wide level. Everything else that people really wanted, rent stabilization, just cause, fair chance housing, these kinds of policies, again, could only be done with our other hat. And at this moment, we were looking at something that could be very broad in the community. So we implemented AC Housing Secure and put the others in our pockets, because we knew they could only be done with unincorporated county, because they were land use and ordinances. And when the opportunity for the challenge grant came up, we seized upon it as a way to further this work, because our challenge grant is focused on the unincorporated county, and then it gives us the opportunity to continue to work with this community in the inside-outside strategy and really confirm that what we learned in 2017 still held true. And so we're currently in that process. It is critical to meet people where they are, to physically as well as in all other ways. We made a mistake once in the unincorporated county where we were working on a mobile home rent stabilization ordinance. And we had meetings at the public hearing room here at CDA in Hayward. Well, the mobile home parks in the unincorporated county are not actually anywhere near CDA in Hayward. And they're in Castro Valley, and they're tucked away in little places. And people work several jobs. They can't come to meetings during the day. And seniors can't come to meetings a lot of times at night because they don't have the transportation, and public transportation can be a little sketchy. So what we should have done and how we learned from that process several years ago is to go out into the communities where people are, have meetings in the mobile home parks, and actually get their feedback there where they live, as opposed to asking them to come to us. So we try to learn from that in our community charrettes with the anti-displacement program.
Thank you, Jennifer. I definitely feel like that is a similar experience we have in East Palo Alto in terms of barriers to access one location. But Ophelia, could you speak a little bit more to some of the barriers you've seen and also some of the opportunities Yucca has seen to be able to break these barriers down?
Yeah, definitely. And I'll touch on a couple things just from the previous question as well. And one thing really briefly is on the sort of, well, I sort of have a quarrel with the whole innovation term simply because coming from the grassroots world, there's no solution I've heard talked about at the city level that wasn't talked about already in community, that folks haven't already named. And probably years ago, there's nothing that I've heard yet that, you know, folks haven't already been saying that they want, that they need. Anytime there's something innovative, I sort of say in the back of my head, communities did it first. The Black community did it first. Indigenous communities did it first. These are things that we've seen in one form or another. What our task, I think, before us here is doing this work is figuring out what sort of solutions have already been talked about and have already been named and maybe could be refined and molded to figure out how we turn them into policy and solidify them in our communities to ensure that, you know, that they are integrated into the into the community so that we figure out the sort of housing landscape that we want and in the long term, the kind of community we want to be. So in 2016, touching on what was done at the city level in East Palo Alto, there was a ballot initiative that basically is a gross receipts tax on landlords at 1.5%. And it's a tax that only applies to landlords of, I think, 5 units and or more, landlords who own complexes that are 5 units or more. And the revenue from that ballot measure goes toward the general fund in East Palo Alto, but it is named in the ballot that, you know, that fund is to go toward increasing affordable housing, protecting local residents from displacement and homelessness. That last part is key for us at Yucca because once that revenue was collected, it allowed some of our nonprofits in East Palo Alto to reply to those RFPs and say, hey, we do this work already, and we have an idea of how to continue doing this outreach and education work. But not only that, as I mentioned a little earlier, putting renters, single family renters, multifamily complex renters, Latinx, Pacific Islander, Black, African American renters, elders, and young people in the front and center and in decision making, giving them decision making power at every turn possible. So that means equipping our teams with, you know, the latest policies, the latest protections that are coming down, especially in the midst of COVID. One of the things that we did, Yucca was awarded a grant from the city of East Palo Alto through this Measure O tax. The Measure O tax is the landlord gross receipts tax I just referenced. But basically what we did with that fund is establish a tenant advisory body that we staff and that we stipend folks to contribute, because once again, we value the wisdom, the experience, the expertise that our community members bring to the table, because we know that those closest to the pain of housing instability are also closest to the solutions. So we figure that through that tenant advisory body, we're able to not just strategize with our community members, which again is multiracial, intergenerational, and live in different housing types. Not only strategize on how to do effective outreach and education, because what good is a policy if it's just on the books, but people don't really know about it. People don't know that they need to activate their rights, that they need to exercise their rights. They don't know that there are resources that the city is actively trying to make available. So we're sort of filling that void. That's some of the work that we do, but it's also about strategizing about, are these policies even good fits for East Palo Alto? Are these the right kind of policies? Like in thinking of some of the, again, more innovative or things that have caught on steam more recently, like Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Acts, Community Opportunity to Purchase Act. When we begin exploring those, you know, these bodies that are already established, will help us think through what is the right fit for East Palo Alto. Is this a good fit for East Palo Alto? What is the city not thinking of that you all have concerns about or reservations? So, touching on the barrier question, Karen, which I know you also asked about, it's been really hard to do this work in the midst of COVID, because how ironic that we are in the heart of Silicon Valley, yet there is still a very palpable digital divide. We have folks who are who don't have reliable Wi-Fi access at home. We had just up until a few months ago had students writing essays on cell phones. So there are really great organizations that are filling these voids, but that's one of the challenges that we face, and we find a way around it. We find ways to equip our renter leaders and our youth organizers with the necessary technology and trainings on how to continue being engaged while sheltering in place. And we have successfully found a way around it. Our tenant advisory body, we just met yesterday evening, and the interest is growing. We have more folks who want to be involved. So that means more people power to get things done and to really implement some of the good ideas that our jurisdictions and local cities have, but again, are no good if people don't know about them and aren't exercising those. So that's one of the great things about working on this specific project with the Partnership for the Bay Future. And I hope I touched on a few of the things that you asked, because there was a lot in there that I mentioned.
Oh, yes, definitely. I definitely appreciate the two examples that provided the East Palo Alto Tenant Advisory body and the Alameda County AC process, because I think that is, those are two examples where the policies were developed from the ground up. So the people who are holding the power are the people that will be impacted. And that is one of the key takeaways in terms of when developing these policies, who is being put in the room and who is being consulted with. And the people who are directly impacted should be at the front and center. I Like I mentioned earlier, this session is very short and we are running out of time. But I would like to close off with any big takeaways or pieces of advice that you would like to provide to our audience in terms of experiences that you've had, and in being able to think about really how to create an inclusive housing policy at the local level.
Yeah, I can chime right in since I have a thought at the top of my head. And I think Jennifer certainly made reference to this, I think, a little earlier. But one key takeaway that I would like to leave folks with is that, democratic processes, truly inclusive processes that share power, share decision-making power, are slow and they're hard. Um, and they take time, obviously, but it is always, always, always better, and in the long run, easier to take that route as opposed to having to do damage control afterwards because you decided to plot a policy or a project or something in the middle of community, and folks end up saying, who came up with this, or this is not quite what we thought a solution ought to have been. So that's one key. There's a few more, but I think that's one key takeaway that I would love folks to leave with. Take that longer but more thorough route as opposed to having to find yourself doing damage control afterwards. It's truly easier in the long run, and better, just better overall.
Yeah, I'm reminded of that old quote. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Our residents in Alameda County are our greatest resources. We're just stewards here at the government level. So partnership with our residents in order to create a more equitable society here in Alameda County is absolutely our goal. And we cannot do that without partnership.
Great. I think that's a really great way to end. Thank you all so much for your time.